All right, in this session, we are going to create a custom brochure for a stand-up paddleboard rental company, a local company here in Montana. We're going to take inspiration from one of these product catalogs I found of the stand-up paddleboards here. So we're going to apply the look and feel of this catalog to a simple 9x12 brochure. Here is the guide that I've downloaded from one of the printers we will use, so that way we have the right file settings out of the gate. And we're going to implement some of their photos and boards that they rent out, things like that, to create a custom trifold brochure that then will be used to place in one of these rack cards that you might have seen at the hotels or different tourist traps here. We'll take a look at what would make an effective brochure, and I'll start from very start to finish, everything from setting up your files, how to design something custom, and then how to ship it to print. All right, let's get started. All right, before we get too far down the road here, we actually need to start with the end in mind. And what I mean by that is, where is this brochure going to live? Where is it going to be seen? And what's its purpose? So right now we're going to create a simple trifold brochure, and it's going to go in a rack card or a rack like this, both in hotels and in like the Chamber of Commerce and anywhere else that will let us stash a brochure. So looking at this, typically trifold brochures can be an 8.5 by 11, or in this case it's a 9 by 12. So when we fold it up, it's going to be about 4 inches wide by about 9 inches tall. And you'll see that we have a lot of competition. We have a lot of other tourist traps and destinations that this brochure has to stand out against. So as we look closer and look at some of these designs, which ones stick out to you as you look at this? Now, to me, if I'm interested in an activity, I see the ones that actually say what it is. So for example, this helicopter tours really sticks out to me. Rafting sticks out. Fishing sticks out. These are the activities. So if I'm interested in, say, mountain biking, or in this case, paddleboarding, I probably want to see the word paddleboard right on top. Some of these other brochures over here that have their bullet list or just part of the design that gets hidden behind the other brochures, to me aren't nearly as effective as the ones that simply say, hey, here's what I'm about. So we'll definitely implement that as we dive in to our design. We'll create some sort of design that probably has the word paddleboard right at the top just to catch your attention. So we'll keep that in mind. The other thing is the physical limitations of the size. So again, these brochures are about 4 inches wide by about 9 inches tall. And what we need to do now is figure out, well, who's going to print this, right? If we're thinking with the end in mind, who is actually going to produce this brochure for us? So I've got a few different printers here that I use personally that I wanted to share with you and let you take a look at. You're welcome to do anything you want here, pick any size you want here, but Print Runner is one that I've used for quite a while. They do a pretty good job. They're nothing super fancy, but they're extremely affordable, very inexpensive to print with these guys. And you can choose some of the printing options here and see right away how much it's going to cost. If we click down on the drop down size, they do have an option stock right out of the gate for 9 inch by 12 inch. So that's perfect for what we need today. So I know that they are definitely a good option to produce this piece for me. I've got another company here called 4Color Print, and these guys, I've been super impressed with their quality of their business cards. I've got a sample pack I ordered from them, and they are incredible. Really good craftsmanship. Really impressed with them. I haven't ordered a brochure from them yet, so I don't know, but I would assume it would be of the same kind of quality and caliber. But here's another option. And then one that I use locally, I'm in Montana, so these guys are out of Montana, printingforless.com. They've got by far the best customer support I've ever seen or had to work with. I've actually been to their facility, state of the art, really great people and awesome capabilities. So I would definitely recommend them as well if you're going to produce anything for print, in this case, the brochure. So definitely give them a call or order a free sample so you can see what they can do. And then here's just a few other that I Googled and found. Jack Prints is a great one. PS Print I've never used personally, but they do have some options here that look like they're pretty affordable. And then of course Vista Print, I've also seen lots of commercials about them, but I've never actually personally used them. So all of that in mind, let's go ahead and get started. There's a couple ways we can work. One is a lot of printers already have the template for the file you're needing. So sometimes it's easy just to give them a call, or in this case, just download the file you need, or we can create it from scratch. So I'll show you both ways here in just a second. I'm going to jump over here to Print Runner. So printrunner.com, come over to brochures, and then you can click on whatever size you want to work with. In this case, I've got the templates tab right here, and they have all kinds of templates already created for me. So the one that we want specifically is just this 9x12 trifold. So I'll click the download button, and I'll choose Photoshop for my format right now, and I'll download the template. And while that's downloading, in fact, it's already done here, I just want to show you one other thing that might be helpful for those of you who don't know anything about printing yet or the production of brochures. They've got a really great illustration here to show you what the folds look like. So we have a half fold, a trifold, and this is the brochure we're going to be making today. You can see how that folds up. But they also have other options like a Z fold and a gate fold that can be really effective solutions depending on where this is going and what you want to do. So just take a look at that, get familiar with the folds that are available, as well as the paper stock. In this case, we are going to be designing for a 100-pound gloss book. So that's something I'll get into a little bit later, but basically it's going to feel really good in your hands. It's going to be a little bit shiny, and it's going to feel pretty sturdy, but not too sturdy, not like a cardstock. So it's a great choice for this brochure. And in the next lesson here, we're going to take a look at that template I just downloaded, and we'll also look at creating a new file from scratch. All right, so we just looked at the end in mind. We know what we're about to make, and we downloaded the template for it. And unfortunately, this is about to be the most boring part of this whole section, and I apologize in advance. So we're going to try and blitz through it as fast as we can. And also, even though we downloaded this template, I really want to show you how to create this from scratch, because here's the deal. We want to learn how to do this and create custom projects here. So by learning how to set up the projects ourselves and set up these files like these templates, you'll be able to deviate from these and create anything you can imagine at any size. So let's look at these templates real quick and just kind of see what we've got going on, and then we'll create our own template for our own needs. So right now, this brochure is actually, the document's looking at portrait mode right here, or vertical. So I see my front cover, I see my back cover, and then I see my inside panel. So it is one document here, and it's just got guides to show me where things fall. So if we wanted to dive in with the brochure just building right over the top of this document, how I would work is I'd come up here to image rotation, and I'll rotate this clockwise real quick, just because we're going to build a standard, tall, skinny brochure here. So I've got my layers here. This guide is just on this background layer. What I would probably do is hit Command J to jump it to its own layer. I'll fill the background with black by hitting, or with white, I guess, by hitting Command Delete. It's my shortcut to fill with that background color. And now if I turn off that layer we just jump cut, we got a blank white canvas. The other thing I'd start doing is building in my guides. So with my ruler turned on, if you don't see that, go to View and then Rulers, or Command R. I would drop in just some guides, and the reason why is because I don't always want to see all of the extra all the extra text and stuff here. So I drop in some guides that kind of show me where my crops are going to be, and my trim marks and my folds and stuff like that. So then what I could do, and I won't do all of this because this is not how we're going to work, but I just want to show you if I was building on this template, how I would go about it. I'll turn off this guide layer. Let's just rename this, call it guide, so we remember what it is. I'll turn that off, and now we can see that I have the regular guides from Photoshop in there. They're a lot more subtle, and it makes it so I can really focus on the design. Now that I know where my cover size is, and I've got the front, back, and the inside flap, I could start designing, and there's a lot of ways I could go about it. Maybe it's just dragging in one of these photos and scaling it up a little bit, maybe putting a title in here, or paddleboard rentals. And you can get the idea real quick how you can start to build a custom brochure going about it this method here. When it's all said and done, we could simply export this and send it to press, which again, this is great if the printer you're going to work with has a template for you, but what if they don't? Well, you could build over this template here, and in fact I recently just did that, and then my client went to a different printer who had different settings, and we had to recreate the whole thing from scratch anyway. So that being said, let me show you now how I would create this whole thing from scratch. So feel free to watch as much as you can bear. I really hope you learn this and can see the value in knowing how to do this from scratch. If you're just too bored, feel free to move on to the next lesson and you can start with the template file. But here we go. I'm going to go ahead and hit Command N to open up a new document. And since this is going to be a 9 by 12, it's actually going to be 9 inches tall by 12 inches wide. So we'll put 12 inches wide by 9 inches tall, 300 DPI, and at CMYK color mode for print. I'll go ahead and usually I would hit OK. We'll go ahead and hit OK. Now here's one thing we did not account for now. This is the exact size of the trim. So if we come back over to this document and I turn on my guides here, we just made a document that's only as big as this blue line, but we did not account for what we call the bleed. This is extra space that we need in order for the printer to be able to have room to grip the file and then be able to trim it back so that way it's a clean cut with color all the way through the end. We call it a bleed. So what we're going to do now, I'm going to make a couple guides real quick. I'll drop in my rulers right on the edge actually, because what we're about to do is make this document bigger. And that way these guides will be right where my trim mark is. And in fact, I'm just going to jump cut this layer to this background to another layer by hitting Command J. I'll double click and I'll call this trim. That way I know what my trim size is. Now what I'm going to do is change my canvas size. So if I just hit Command, Alt, and the letter C, let's show you where that is in our menu. If we come up here to Image, Canvas size, we can quickly change our canvas size. And what I'm going to do, instead of making it the 12 by 9 inches, I'm going to relatively add a 1/4 inch. So that's 0.25 inches to the width and 0.25 inches to the height. And if we divide that in half, that actually gives us an 1/8 of an inch extra on all sides. So I'll go ahead and hit OK. And now we can see we have this extra 1/8 of an inch all the way around. Okay. So now what I can do is make another layer in here, and I'll just fill this one with black. Alt delete fills with my foreground color. Okay, so now I can see I've got my trim in front and I've got my background layer behind it. So now what we can do is start building in these panels, and the best way to do that is to divide it in 3. Now there's one thing we do need to be careful of, so I'm going to go ahead and start by just dragging out a shape here with my shape tool down here using the rectangle tool or the letter U. And it's currently behind my white trim layer, so I'll just bring this to the front. And what I can do now is hit Command T to free transform this. We'll set the width to 4 inches because we're going to do 3 panels, so 12 divided by 3 is 4. So I did 4 inches wide, and currently when we do this, it wants to default to a percentage. So by entering 4 and then IN for inches, it'll make my shape 4 inches instead of 4%. My height I'll put at 9 inches, so 9 IN, and then I'll hit the Enter key on my 10 keypad. And now what I can do, we'll go ahead and apply this transformation, and I've got one of the panels ready to go. So I'll drag this over to where my trim mark is. Make sure it snaps to that, and if it doesn't snap, make sure under View you have Snap turned on. Now what we're going to do is drag down another guide. So I'll drag it down, and then I'll hit the Alt key to make it vertical. And now I'm going to hold down Alt to drag a copy of this rectangle. So actually we're going to name this first. We'll call it left panel. Alt drag a copy, and now that snaps into place, and this is our back panel. And actually technically this isn't the left panel, it's left on the screen, but it's the actual inside panel of our brochure. And then I'm going to drag down another guide. I'm going to Alt click and drag to create another copy, and this will be the front cover. Okay, so now we've essentially done the same thing as what we already had here. They do have a few more guides that they've set up. They've set up a little bit of space between those folds and everything. But we essentially have the exact same document going on, but you created this custom, and that way, let's say you wanted to make a very specific size. You can do anything you want. So one other thing we need to be aware of, if this is truly our front cover, and this is our back cover, and it folds right down the middle, this inside panel, if this folds, it's kind of hard to visualize, but if this were to fold towards this spine, if these are the exact same sizes, they're going to kind of run into each other on this fold. So we would need to trim just a touch back, and that's why we need to talk to the printers when we go to make a file like this to make sure that we know where their folds are going to be, because there's nothing worse than having a specific color on each panel. Let's just show you here. And then if you were to miss those folds, let's say our guides, let's say this is, this hard black line, but let's say the fold really happens, I don't know, like here, it wouldn't look good. So that's where we really want to be careful. And if we do set it up this way, that we've triple checked our measurements and we make sure it works good. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and hit save, Command S, and I'll call this brochure out. This will be the outside of the brochure. On my desktop here, we've got this folder for all of our design files, and I'll put it in my Photoshop file right there. I'll hit save, and now we're pretty much ready to go with the outside design. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and stop this video, and in the next lesson we're going to start actually creating the design. Alright, with our brand new document set up and ready to go, let's go ahead and start designing. And I'm going to start with the front cover first, and click once on this panel, this front cover shape that we have here, and drag over the image we have for the cover. And the reason why I clicked here is just so that way it brings in that image right above that shape, and I can hold on Alt and click between the two to mask it and keep it within that shape, just to kind of see how my color is gonna, or how my cover is gonna lay out here. And I want to scale this as big as I can while at the same time giving enough space between where the fold is and where the right edge is going to be, that we don't accidentally lose any of her arm or the board in the fold if it doesn't get folded perfectly, or trim off any of this paddle if the trim misses the trim just a touch. So that's about as big as I comfortably want to make that. So what I'm going to do now is go ahead and scale this into place, and I'm going to unmask this now because it's actually hiding from the bleed as well. So I'll hit Alt and click between those to undo that mask. And now what I want to do is create a blend, a seamless blend between the sky and, we need a little bit more sky up here that we don't have. So what I'm going to do is Command click on the new layer icon, and what that's going to do is put a new blank layer below the layer I have selected now. I'll hit the I to get my eyedropper tool, and I'll click as close to that edge as I can get without turning black here. And that way I've got a matched color from the sky, and I'll fill this layer 2 with that blue color. So I've sampled that on my foreground color here. I'll hit Alt Delete to fill that. And now it's almost perfectly seamless, but there is a little bit of a transition. So now what I'm going to do is apply a mask to this image. So I'll click on that image. I'll come down here and click on the layer mask. Making sure I'm selected here, I'm going to hit the letter G to get my gradient tool. I'll hit the letter D to get my default swatches, and now I'm going to hit the letter X to swap my fill and my stroke, so that way my black fill is on front. Then I'm going to make sure that I'm using my foreground to transparent gradient right here. And now what's going to happen is as I click and drag down, I'm painting essentially with a black gradient that then goes from black to transparent. And what that's doing is it's masking. So whatever color is behind here, let's say I had, any color at all, it's going to blend from that sky to whatever's below it. So I'll just delete that layer real quick and bring back my blue. So now I've got a great canvas area, a real good spot to put that paddleboard rentals title. So again, looking at that sample image we had at the beginning of this, let me just pull it back up real quick. This is what we're designing for. So really our whole call to action needs to be about 2 inches tall. From right here, this helicopter tours, I actually measured that. That's about 2 inches tall. So what I'm going to do here is hit the letter U to get my rectangle tool. I'm just going to start to drag a little bit. I'll hide that. I'll hit Command T to get my free transform. And what I'm going to do is change my height and type in exactly 2IN for 2 inches. And now I know that this box is 2 inches tall. I'll hit Command Shift and the right bracket key to bring this layer all the way to the front. And I'm going to drag this up to where that trim mark is and drag down a guide. So now I know that my title really needs to be within this box if I want it to show up in front of everything and not get trimmed off. The other thing I could consider doing is bringing her up into that space, because if we look at, coming back to this again, a couple things will catch our eyes. One is we've got this bright color here on helicopter tours, or the big words raft. The other thing that catches people's eyes are people. So if we had a human, a face or a head right here kind of peeking up, that would also be prone to get attention. So that would be one way to do this, but I like it better with her kind of grounded down here at the bottom. And then that gives us plenty of space up here for that title. So let's go ahead and add a title now. I'll hit the letter T. I'll click once up here and I'll start typing in paddleboard rentals. change my color from pink to white here. And this is a really good spot to save. If we haven't saved yet, I'll go ahead and hit Command S to save my file. And I'm just going to nudge this into place a little bit using my keyboard shortcuts, Command Alt and up and down arrow to change my leading, and then Command Shift and the period key or the comma key to change my font sizes. And I'll just kind of play with this until I get it where I like it. And for right now, I'm just working on my text placement and getting things kind of in place here. So I'm not going to spend too much time yet. All right, so we'll have our title here. And then everything else is looking good there. And now for the back side, we need to put in some contact information. So I'm going to jump over to my assets folder, and I've got this text file with all of the rental assets and all of the text that we need. So for the back, we're going to put the directions, and we're going to put their address as well as their Facebook page. So I'm just going to go ahead and copy all of this text. Command C to copy. Come back over here, hit the letter T to get my text tool. And I'll click and drag to get my text box and hit Command V to paste. I'll hit Command A to highlight all of that, and then I'm going to change this size back down to something maybe like 14 points and just see if that gets us closer. And that's not bad. We're still clipping a little bit, so I'll click once on this. I'll grab his handle and drag it down a little bit just to show as much of that text as possible. And I'm not too worried yet about the design. I'm just kind of getting things in place so I know where they're going to go. And then the next thing we're going to do is this inside flap. So when you open the cover, if you're looking at the front cover here and you were to open that up, this panel is the first thing you would see. So what we're going to drop in here is some about text. So we'll grab this text right here. And then same thing, we'll just click and drag and we'll make another text box. And again, we're going to call this good. So for this first section, this first video, I'm just dropping in some content right here. And then in the next one, we're going to go ahead and continue refining the design. So I'll go ahead and hit save. And in the next video, we're going to start creating some custom design elements and fleshing out this outside panel. All right, now that we have our text in place, let's go ahead and push the design further. One of the things I'm going to do right out of the gate is go ahead and license this photo because I can tell right away I'm going to get tired of looking at this watermark and I know we're going to use it. So I'll go ahead and come over to that original image here. I'll right click on it and I'll click on license image. And it's going to ask me if I want to use one of my licenses here. I'll click OK. And then as soon as that's done syncing here, that watermark will go away. And in the meantime, I can keep pushing my design forward here. So I'm going to click on the title. I'll hit the letter T to get my text, my type tool. I'll hit Command A to highlight all of that. And I'm going to jump over here to my fonts, and I'm going to use Proxima Nova for my title here. And let's jump over to one of the extra bold versions. Maybe even black. We'll jump into the black version just so that way it's as big as possible to get the biggest impact with that minimal space we have. And let me just try this too. I'm going to go ahead and jump this to 2 or 3 lines and just see how big it gets. So maybe we cut out rentals here. I'm going to hit Command X to cut that. I'll drag a copy of this down, hit the letter T, highlight all of this, and hit Command V to paste that back in. The only reason why I did that is so I can move this independently. It'll be a little bit easier to work with. I'll hit Command A to highlight that, and let's bring this down to maybe a light, just so there's a good contrast between the titles here. All right, let's see how this is looking here. And there's no right or wrong. You can do whatever you want, whatever looks good, however it's going to play out, whatever, you know, gets their attention and hopefully has a good call to action. So in this case, if they're interested in the rentals, they'll see this and they can pick up your brochure. All right, so another thing that I've talked about in some of these previous lessons too, I could spend all day long playing with typography and, you know, nudging things around in place and just trying to get them, you know, perfectly set. So for your sanity and my own, I'm going to force myself to just stop right now. Seriously, I'm going to stop. I'm about to stop. Okay, there we go. I'm just going to stop. So that way we can come back to that later and push that further if we want to. But you can see how you could easily spend a lot of time there. Next, what I'm going to do is click on this text in the back. I'm going to set that to Proxima Nova as well. And we'll probably jump to, let's try regular first and just see how that treats us. And one thing we have going on here, I don't even know where I learned the shortcut, but if you hit Command, Shift, and the letter K, it'll change from your regular case here to all caps. And I had brought this in apparently with all caps. I'm going to hit Command Shift and letter K, and it'll bring it back to my sentence case or my title case, whatever it was when I brought it in. And then I'm going to jump over to my character window here. And if you don't see that, jump up here to Window, go down to Character. I'm going to reset my leading to auto. And then right here, I'm going to hold over this and set my tracking to 0, just to kind of get it set back to its default setting. Okay, so now we can see that we do have a problem as far as being able to see this text over the cloud and that watermark, which I'm kind of surprised hasn't updated yet. So let's take a look at that real quick and just see what's going on. I most likely bought some other image that I didn't mean to buy. But we'll let it just think about it here for a second, and if it's not done loading by the time we're done with this video, we'll get it fixed. So what I'm going to do now is I need to consider whether I want to have this directions text up here at the top or maybe break it up a little bit here. So what I'll do is I'll grab this text, this phone number, I'll hit Command X to cut it, and I'll paste it in its own text box down here, Command V to paste. Just kind of scale it up a bit. So that wouldn't be bad. Let me turn my guides back on here. That's just Command and the semicolon key. Just turning those on and off here. Let me turn that on though, and what I do sometimes, I'll hit the letter U and I'll drag a rectangle between my guides, so from one guide to the other. And that way what I can do is shift click on my text, and then I have my alignment options, and I can make sure that this is dead center between these guides. Sometimes what will happen is you might have it off a little bit, so by shift clicking and hitting center, I can make sure that this is aligning to those guides. Alright, so I got my text in place here, and let's bring down this Facebook link. I don't need the whole HTTPS, so let's just do facebook.com/ and we'll delete that here. And I'll drag down another copy of this, so hold on Alt, click and drag, Command V to paste that link in here. And it needs a little more room, so what I'm going to do is just drag this out a little bit. By holding down Alt, it drags both sides at the same time. Alright, so we got our link in there, that's looking good. And again, I'm trying to roll through this as fast as I can so you get a pretty good idea of, you know, my workflow, but at the same time not having to sit here watch me make every single decision that I'm doing here. Alright, so let's take a look at this one more time. Alright, so we're really going to need to darken this up, or maybe let's try making our text darker. So I'm going to click on this blue to get me close, and then I'm going to double click on my thumbnail and then just drag down or click down a little bit more just to get something in the same tone but much darker, and I'll click OK. And now I'll click once on that text and I can hit Alt Delete to fill that layer with the dark blue. And that's better if I'm on this white cloud area. I'll go ahead and resize my text box a little bit. Command A to highlight my whole artboard, and then now I can hit the center key to center that as well. And I'm going to align this left. So I'll click on my paragraph tab down here and click on the left align. And let's just kind of tweak this a little bit more. This is 14 point. Let's bring it down to 12 point. That looks a little bit better. And then our title, let's make this also be this extra bold, just for kind of branding consistency. And then also I'm going to double click, hit Command Shift K to make those all caps. Command Alt and the right arrow key to kind of track it out a little bit. And that's getting better. And again, I could spend all day here, so I'm just going to kind of get it close. Now the next thing I want to do is work on this left panel and make it maybe a little more visually appealing. So what I'm going to do is hit the letter U to get my rectangle tool here. We'll go to my fill and we'll change it to white. I'm just going to click and drag to get it started. Now I'm going to hit Command T to free transform this up to the top left and down to the bottom right. I'll hit return to commit that, and I'll hit Command Shift and the right bracket key to bring it all the way to the front of my stack. But now I can't see that text behind it, so I'll turn it off. I'll click once on this text and I'll do the same thing, Command Shift right bracket to bring it all the way to the front, and now I can turn my rectangle back on, but we can't see that text. So let's change the color of that text. I've still got that blue selected here, so I'll just hit Alt Delete to fill that with that same color. And I want to make this text the same size. So what I'll do here is I'll highlight this. I'll jump over to my character styles and paragraph styles windows. And again, if you don't see those, jump over here to window and make sure they're turned on down here. I'm going to create a new layer style using what I've selected here, and we'll just call this body. And it's going to keep all those character settings that we have. I'll click OK. And now what I can do is highlight this text, hit Command A, and apply that body style to it. I'm going to click on this little arrow down here, which will reset it so that way it matches exactly without any extra styling on it. And now I need to grab this heading as well. So let's make a new paragraph style for this heading. So I'll click on that and then add that new paragraph style. We'll call this heading. And I'll click OK. And I'll apply that over here to this word about as well. So I'll click on the word heading, and now we have identical layouts. And the bonus or the benefit to this is I can at any time, let's say I want to change this color, I can double click on the body font and change the color to maybe more of a grayscale. And by doing that, it's going to change both of these at the same time. Alright, so we're getting closer. Now I want to do is just bring in some design elements and maybe make this thing pop a little bit better. So let's go ahead and maybe grab this paddleboard image. I'll kind of scale it down into place here. We'll get it close. And that looks pretty good. And then I want to add some more visual interest behind here. So what I'm going to do is find maybe this mountain image, or maybe this is a good spot to jump over to like pexels.com that we've been looking at before and find a nice mountain photo. Because this lake actually is in the mountains. So let's go ahead and find, let's see, a good mountain shot like this right here. So I'll click once on this image. And I'll click on the free download button here. I'll right click and save image as, and I'll save this to my assets folder so I have it for later. Let's come back to my desktop, to this brochure file, assets, photos, and I'll throw it in there. And then I'm just going to click and drag right into my Photoshop icon just so I have it in here to start working with. And what I'm thinking here is I'm going to click and drag into my brochure, and I'll drop it right over here into that About panel, and I'm going to hit Command Shift and U to desaturate this. Now I'm going to hit Command L to bring up my levels, and I'm just going to play with this a little bit. I'm just going to lighten it up a lot, actually. I'll play with the contrast here and my levels overall. And what I'm looking for is just a subtle effect. So I'll bring this back down behind my text, and then I'm going to bring my opacity down to maybe like 20 or 30%, just enough that it's kind of showing up there. I'm going to hold on Alt and click so it masks behind this rectangle shape. And then let's go ahead and turn my guides off and maybe drag this text up a little bit here. I'll drag this shape down, maybe scale it down a touch. So all I'm really looking for here is just, again, just a little bit of visual interest, just to kind of set it off so it's not stark white here. Alright, maybe even I'll hit the letter 2, which will change this layer to 20%. You can hit your number keys to get any percentage you want here on the opacity. Alright, that's looking pretty good, and I like where it's going. Now the other thing I want to start doing is adding some textures and just kind of cleaning things up a little bit. So I'm going to highlight all this text. I notice as I move this up, not all of this had that paragraph style applied to it. So let's go ahead and find that and fix it real quick. We'll click on that body and reset it. Okay, so now I can't see that at all, so I'm just going to highlight it, and I'll change this from a gray to a white. There we go, that looks pretty good. Alright, so I like the direction this is going. Now the only few things I want to do now is create some elements that we'll be able to repeat through all of this. So I actually have a texture that we can use in one of the asset files. It's a vector halftone. So what I'll do is double click on this to open it up in Illustrator. I'll click once to highlight that shape and hit Command C to copy. We'll jump back into Photoshop and hit, well, before we paste it, let's see where we're going to paste it. I kind of want to put it all over the place, but let's jump into, actually let's put it right in the front and see what happens. We'll hit Command V to paste it as a smart object. I'll hit OK. And now that texture comes in front of everything. So it kind of looks like a mess. So let's kind of selectively add this to things. So what I'm going to do is go ahead and hit delete. I'll click once on this photo to come back down to this layer, and now I'm going to hit Command V to paste that again, and it'll paste right in front there of this photo. And I'm going to drag it down below the image here, so that way it only shows up in that textured sky area. I'm going to change my blend mode to multiply, and let's drop the opacity down to about 50% by hitting the letter 5 or the number 5. There we go. And now we've got this subtle texture that's kind of come in. Maybe make it a little more subtle than that. I'll hit the letter 3 to make it 30% instead. Alright, so now we can add that texture over here to this white section as well. So I'll click on this rectangle, I'll hit Command V to paste that again as a different shape, and this time I'll hit Alt and click down on that rectangle to mask it inside of the rectangle. And I'm going to make this much lighter, so I'll hit the number 1 to get a 10% screen. And that way it's still there, it kind of shows up as one whole pattern, but it doesn't show up quite so dark, and there we go. Alright, so that's looking pretty good. In the next lesson, we're going to take a look at the inside and get that ready to go. One more thing I wanted to add to this was this watermark actually never did update. So looking at my library asset, I did license it. I've got the little blue check mark, so I know it's licensed. So when we come down, let's click on this layer here. We can see that the cloud icon has a yellow icon over the top, telling me that it's been updated in the cloud, but it actually has an update on this layer. So what I'm going to do is right click on the title here, and then I've got a whole bunch of options here, but what we're looking for is update modified content. So let's go ahead and click on that, and just like that, the watermark goes away. It's now updated to the cloud, and we are good to go. Alright, now it's time to start working on the inside of the brochure. So rather than do all that work we did at the beginning again and starting from scratch, let's just go ahead and come up here to File, Save As, and let's call this brochure in. This will be the inside of our brochure, so I'll save it right in that same folder as the outside of the brochure. We'll click Save, and now we have two versions of the exact same thing. So since this is brochure inside, I can go ahead and start deleting a lot of this stuff that I don't need anymore, because we're going to be creating the inside of the brochure. Another thing I could do is just, let's see, come all the way down here to shift click between the top layer and then the layer right above where my guides are, hit Command G to throw those into a group, and then I can turn that off. And so that way I still have those files to reference if I wanted to bring over the text in the new front document, but for right now they're not in our way as we're working. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and bring my layers panel back into Docket with the rest of those windows. And we're ready to dive in and create the inside of our brochure. So there's a lot of ways we could do this, but let's go ahead and look at the text we have to include. So when I pull up my my rentals text, there really isn't that much more we need to drop in here. Everything else has been accounted for except for this chunk of text. So what that tells me is we could probably do a more photo-driven approach on this. So this is the whole inside of the brochures. We've got it opened up. So what I'm going to do is find a couple photos that I think would be a good solution for this. And the one that I already found before we started this was this one where we've got the family on paddleboards and we've got the kid that's kind of looking at you. And the reason why I like this is because it shows that paddleboarding can be a family thing. It's not just, you know, it could be anybody, right? And so what I'm thinking here as I bring this in, I'm just going to scale it up and make it go full width here, and I'm going to center him, since he's the one that's looking directly at you. I'm going to center him to the center of the document right here, and that gives me a lot of space over here on the top right and kind of in the middle panel to bring in those details on the rentals. So with that dropped in, let's go ahead and bring in some text, and what I'm thinking is I'll turn on this group again. I'll drag it to the front, and I'm just going to grab this directions text, and I'll hit Command Shift and the right bracket to throw it all the way in front out of that group. I'll turn that group back off, and there's my directions text. And I'm going to highlight all of this, and I'm going to work with a few different colors on the inside. Now I'm going to click on this question mark, and the reason why it's a question mark is because it's got blue and white, and so it doesn't know what to choose since they're two different colors here. But I'll select that, and I'm just going to sample from his shorts, and the reason why is because it'll help tie these graphics together a lot better, and I'll do that a lot of times. So anytime you're working with a photo, we could sample from right here, or maybe his red shorts, and find something that ties back into this. But I found that this color right in his shorts seemed to be the best fit on that light sky. So let's see, we've got that set up here. Let's go ahead and grab our text. And our title is going to be rentals, so I'll copy that and I'll come back over and drop it in right here where it says directions. And then let's go grab the rest of our text here. Let's just work, let's work one at a time. I'm just going to grab this, hit Command C, and then jump back over here and drop it in this paragraph section here, Command V to paste. All right, so we've got one set of text. Now let's bring back over the rest of it here. All right, and now these hourly rates here could kind of be like a subheading. So we have our main heading here under rentals, and then we also have this subheading. So let's go ahead and stylize this a little bit better here. So I'm thinking we can start by just making it a little bit bolder. Maybe a semi-bold might be enough to make it stand out. I'll triple click in there. Let's try, how about bold? And that's better. So let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and turn this subheading we just made into a paragraph style. So I'll come over here to my paragraph styles, and I'll highlight this text, and I'll add a new paragraph style, and we'll call this H2 or subheading 2. And then I'm going to highlight this down here and apply that as well. And when we have this little plus sign, that means it's picking up some other styles as well. So we're going to hit this little back arrow button to reset it, just to only have the H2 settings. All right, so that's looking pretty good. And let's go ahead and let's see. Let's split this up a little bit so it looks a little better. All right, so that's looking a lot better here. The next thing we want to do is make sure we have all of our text, and we have one more chunk of text that didn't come over. Let's grab this here. And we'll drop it in at the bottom of this. Now I could have just copied and pasted all of this at one time, but sometimes it's overwhelming to work with all the text at once when you're not sure exactly how it's going to lay out and if it's going to look good. And in this case, the waves and the darkness of this color right here is kind of interfering with my text. So I need to spend some time here refining that. So I'm going to go ahead and push pause, refine this a little bit, and then the next lesson we're going to jump in and show you how to export this file. All right, let's go ahead and look at the changes I made real quick. We're going to do just a couple more finishing touches, and then we'll go ahead and export this project. So for the type, really all I did was just reorder these so that way the rental period was above the pricing, and I changed this so now this H2 has a underline, it's a little bit bigger, and it has a little bit of gap between the next paragraph. And the way I did that, if we open up this H2 paragraph style, I turned on the underlined here, and I went down to indents and spacing, and I gave it a little bit of space, about a 10-point gap between where it is and the next line. And that's about it as far as that goes. And then H2, I made it, or this is now an H3 rather, and it's a 12-point font in bold, and then the regular body copy that we made earlier is 12-point regular. So I didn't do too much there. I brought the text, the title over to the side and made it much larger, and the reason why was because once I gave all of these a little bit more spacing, I was running out of room to drop that title at the top. And what I did here with these lines was simply use the pen tool. If I hit the letter P to get my pen tool, I changed it to a very thin, just a 0.5 point stroke here, and then I made sure I was drawing with the shape of the pen tool and just click to draw that path that I had there. So that's how I made that. And then the only thing we need to do now is just kind of touch up this font or this paragraph down here so we can read it better, and then export it. And there's a lot of ways that we can do that. We could draw a rectangle behind it, so we could put a fill of white. We'll turn off the stroke, and we could just go ahead and draw a big old rectangle right behind this text, which would be fine. It would definitely make it more legible, but I'm a huge fan of doing things with a little more subtlety. So what I want to do instead is click once on this photo, and I'm going to turn on the mask layer right down. There it is. Click on the mask, and now what we're going to do is actually paint with black with a soft brush to try and hide what's behind here. Now as soon as I do that though, what's going to show up behind it is actually darker because we have this black shape behind it. So what I'm going to do is command click on the new layer icon to bring a new layer below here. I'm just going to fill it with white by hitting command delete, since my background color here is already white, so that fills this layer with white. Now I'm going to click on this mask, so that's selected. I'll hit the letter B to get my brush tool, and I'm going to jump over to my brush presets and make sure I've got a soft brush. I'll turn off my spacing here. I'll make sure the hardness is at 0, and we'll crank the size up quite a bit actually. I'll turn off my caps lock so I can actually see the size of the brush. By turning caps lock on and off, it just changes from a precise cursor to the actual shape of the brush. And then up here, I'm going to turn the opacity of this brush down quite a bit, probably down to about 25 maybe. And now again, making sure I'm painting with black on this mask so that it hides it. I'm just going to kind of subtly draw or paint with this brush until I'm happy with the result. So I'm just kind of scrubbing over this, and again, the goal is just to make it so the text is legible, but so the background's still kind of there. And I'm just going to bring it down here a little bit too, so there's more of a transition, and we'll kind of highlight that horizon just a little bit more here, and maybe up here just again, just to try and blend all this effect together so you don't even really notice that it's going on. And there we go. Now we can read that text. Everything's looking really good. I'll go ahead and hit Command S just to save this. And now what we need to do is export this for print. So what we're going to do is go ahead and flatten everything. So the first thing I'll do is come up here to Layer, Flatten Image. And the reason why I do that is that way nothing gets bumped or moved in the printing process, and I have everything exactly where I want it. I'll go to File, Save As, and I'll come back over to my main brochure file and make sure I'm into the files sent now. This will be the final file. So I'll click in Finals, and I'll change this from Photoshop to a PDF, Photoshop PDF, and I'll go ahead and hit Save. So I don't need to preserve Photoshop editing capability since it's just a flat layer, so I'll turn that off. Everything else in here should be just fine. I'll just make sure real quick. I'll make sure my compression is no lower than 300. That looks good. And I'll hit Save PDF. And once it's done saving, we'll be able to double check our work here. But while it's thinking about it, let's come back and open up that outside file as well. So we'll come back in here. We'll open this up. We'll go to Layer, Flatten Image. And now when you do this, be very, very careful you don't accidentally save your PSD, or you would lose all of that work and you wouldn't be able to go back in and make changes. So before I do anything else, I'm going to go to Save As, not Save. And we'll save this as a PDF as well. And we'll stick it in there and we'll hit Save. Everything looks good. I'll hit Save PDF. And now you've just made your first brochure. So one other thing I want to mention here. So when we look at this, we don't see any guidelines as far as where this is going to be trimmed or folded or any of that. And that's because we built on top of the template from Print Runner. But if you're going to send this to another printer and they have no idea where these guides are, we need to help set them up for success by giving them bleed marks and trim marks, fold marks, those kinds of things. So in the next lesson, I'll show you how to create a custom file that gives a printer all of that information. Alright, if we create a custom brochure like this, on the one hand we can see where there's probably obviously a fold, but down here it's kind of a guess, and unless you've built over the top of somebody else's template and they know where the fold is supposed to be, you need to tell them where that's going to happen at. So that's what we're going to do in this lesson, is show you how to create a custom export on your own that gives your printer your fold marks and your trim so they know where to do those things. So what we're going to do in this first lesson, I'm going to show you how to do this in InDesign, then we'll do it again in Illustrator, and you can just kind of pick your poison, choose however you want to do it. I use both ways. It just really depends on the project. So let's go ahead and create a new document in InDesign, and I'm going to go ahead and create a two-page document, one for the front, one for the back, and we'll turn off facing pages. We'll make this a 12-inch by 9-inch document, so it's the exact same size as our brochure. And then right now I'm going to turn off the gutter, and I'll put my columns at 3 since they were equal columns when we did this. I'm going to turn off my margins here, and then this is where the important part is. So for the bleed, we want to add an 1/8 inch bleed all the way around, which actually adds a 1/4 inch to the file size. So we'll put 0.125, that's an 1/8 of an inch on all sides. And then for the slug, what the slug is extra space around the document where you can put anything you want, notes to the printer or other design elements or whatever. It doesn't print, but it exports with the project so your printer can see that. So I'll just put a 2-inch slug on all sides here, and then I'll go ahead and hit OK. So now we've got a 2-page document here, and by turning off facing pages now, instead of these being stacked side by side, it's just 2 pages. Alright, so we see our columns, everything's ready to go. So what I'm going to do is first bring in that final artwork. So I'm going to go ahead and go to File and Place, right here, Command D is that shortcut. And let's find our final brochure files. So final sent, finals, and let's go ahead and start with the outside of the brochure. I'll click open, and then I'm just going to come up to the top left and paste it. And just to make sure it's where I want it to be, I'm going to come over here and make sure I align to page, and then center and horizontal center that document. Okay, so now we're in good shape, and it looks really terrible. Why is that? Well, remember, Illustrator or InDesign tries to kind of save you from yourself if you have a slow computer, and it turns down your display performance. So come to View, Display Performance, and turn on High Quality Display, and now it should look a lot better. All right, so we've got that going. Now on page 2, I'll double click there and hit Command D to place the inside of my brochure. I'll open that and I'll just click anywhere, since I'm going to use this shortcut over here on the top right to align horizontal and vertical centers. So that looks good. My margins are in the right spot. Just double checking that that looks good, and that falls exactly where I want it to be. So that tells me that I did set up my document correctly. All right, so that looks good. Now what we need to do, we could just export it just like this and add crop marks, but I do want to go ahead and spell out exactly where my fold is supposed to be. There's a couple ways we could do this. We could do it on each page individually, or I could use my A master and do it here. So what I'm going to do is jump over to layers, and I'll rename this layer. Everything is currently on this one layer. I'll rename this artwork, and that is where my artwork will live. And then I'll create a new layer above it called guides. One thing to notice when we have the new layer icon open, if I double click on this, I can actually turn off print this layer. So you can put layers on top. So you could actually have a true guide on front of your artwork and then turn that off, and it won't actually print. Whatever's on that layer won't print. But in this case, I want it to print. I'm going to put my guides in the slug area, so I want my printer to be able to see that. So I'll leave that selected and I'll click OK. Now what I'm going to do is zoom in a little bit, and again, we are working on our master page, but let me just make sure here. Yep, we're on our master page, and I'm going to use my pen tool to draw a line here. So I'm just going to click once, and then shift click to another spot here, right on that margin, and right now it doesn't fill with a fill or a stroke, so I'll come up here, and let's go ahead and give it a cyan color so we can see it. And I'm going to change this from a solid line to a dashed line, and then I'm just going to move this up by holding down the shift key so it stays in line. I'm going to hit the letter T to get my text box. I'll click and drag, and I'm just going to type in the word fold. All right, so we got that set, and I'm going to change that to cyan as well. Hit OK. All right, so there's one fold mark. And then I'm going to highlight this, hold Alt, click and drag, hold down Shift to drag a copy. And you want to make sure you get this exactly on point here, right where that fold should be. So just make sure that that's lining up and that that's snapped in place. If you need to, you could come right down here in your document. And then hold on Shift and drag back up again to make sure it's right exactly where it needs to be. Okay, so there's my folds. And now if I come back over here to to page 1 and then to page 2, you see both of those come in the exact same spot. So we're in good shape now. What I can do is, and that's a ton of room for the printer. They don't really need that much space. They can figure it out. I could highlight all these and maybe bring it down a little bit. Let's try that again. One more time. I'm just trying to grab the top of this line. There we go. We'll use the arrow keys and we'll nudge it. How's that? There we go. By not selecting this bottom anchor, it stays in place, but I can just kind of nudge these down a touch. All right, that's good enough. That looks good. That will give them the idea, and I can just double check and make sure those folds are hitting exactly where I want them to on my artwork. Everything looks good. So now let's do two things. First, let's save this. So Command S to save. In case we ever need to come back to this document, I'll go to my brochure file, my design files. I'll create a new folder in here called IND. That's where I put my InDesign files, and I'll call this we'll just call this final brochure, and I'll hit save. Okay, so now what we can do, this is kind of where the magic happens as far as why we did all of this. We'll come over here to File, Export, and we'll jump into that final folder. So File Sent, back to the finals, final brochure. All right, let's go with guides. Okay, we're going to make a print, export, we'll hit save. And let's go through and look at all these settings real quick. We want it to export all pages. We want them as pages, not spreads, so that looks good. All these options, those look good. We can view the PDF after saving. That's fine. I don't need to worry about these right now. Come to the compression, make sure it's not downsampling it to like 72 dpi or something for web. That looks good. Marks and bleeds. This is the whole reason we did this. So we're going to turn on all printers marks. So we're going to have crop marks, bleeds, registration bars, page information, and then also we're going to use document bleed settings. So we'll click on that and it'll pull in those settings we set up at the beginning, that 1/8 of an inch. And then we want to include the slug area as well, that 2-inch border where we put in our fold marks. I'll hit export. And now you can see this is the whole document size, but your printer can take this and they're actually going to print it on a larger parent sheet and then trim it back. So what this tells them is when they see this, okay, here's where this is intended to be folded, and they can see their registration bars, these color bars to see what your system outputted for a true cyan, magenta, yellow, black. And then we've got the trim for the actual document size where it shows where that starts, and then also our crop mark for where the intended trim is going to be. So that's how we do it. That is probably the best way to send a file to a printer who has no idea what your intended sizing is for this. But of course, hopefully you called them before the project started so they do have some kind of an idea. Anyway, hopefully that was helpful. And in the next section here, we're going to do the same thing but with Illustrator. All right, now we're going to export this brochure one more time, but this time using Illustrator so we can get these same printer marks and fold guides on there. So I'm going to go ahead and close this document we made from InDesign. We'll jump over into Illustrator and create a new document here. We'll set the number of artboards to 2 for the inside and the outside. The spacing here is fine, but I'll give us a little more space to work. I'll just hit 1 inch there so we have more space between the artboards. And let's see what else. We want to set the width to 12 inches wide, 9 inches tall. Set your bleed to an 1/8 of an inch, so 0.125 inches. Make sure we're in CMYK and 300 pixels per inch here. I'll hit OK. And now we get a new document here with 2 artboards. So we're going to come up here to File, Place, and we're going to throw in those final files we made. So let's start with the outside. We'll hit Place. And I'll click once in there, and same thing, I'm going to come up here to my options bar and make sure I'm aligning to the artboard, and we'll do those center alignments here, and then we'll place the next one. So we'll go to File, down to Place, and choose the inside of the brochure. Now one thing, notice when I place these are actually linked, and we did the same thing with InDesign too, but I didn't mention it. But with this linked, if we go back through and export a new file with the same name and we replace this, it will dynamically pull in to this Illustrator file with the updated version. This is really handy if a client changes their mind. All you have to do, jump into the original Photoshop document, make your change, save a PDF, and then open your Illustrator or InDesign document, and that link will have automatically updated, and then you can export everything again as one whole batch. It's really slick and it makes it a lot easier to work with. So okay, I'm gonna leave that linked. I'll hit Place. We'll click once in there and just center this up here. All right, so that looks good. Now in Illustrator, we don't have the option for a slug area like we did before. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump over to my layers panel. I'll double click, and just like we did with InDesign, we'll create a new layer called Artwork. We'll create another layer on top. We'll call this Guides. Actually, let's call this Folds, because that's what we're going to put on this layer, is the folds. So what we need to do is tell this where to fold. Now I'm going to have to do a little bit of measuring because I don't really have the margin set in front of me like we did with InDesign. So what I'll do is hit the letter M to get my rectangle tool, and I will change this. I'll turn off my stroke and come back to my fill, and let's just change this to a bright color that we can see really easy. How about full magenta here? I'll click and drag, and now what I want to do is I'll hit the letter E. And then up here at the top we see this transform button. We'll click on that, and we're just going to key in the exact width we want this. So this was going to be 4 inches wide, so 4 inches. And I don't really care how tall it is because this is just going to be a guide for the width where the folds are going to be. So now what I'll do is I'll drag this into place and I'll have it snap. It doesn't seem to want to snap, so let me just check and make sure that is turned on. Snap to grid, snap to point. Okay. So now let's just come up here and make sure that we're getting it exactly where we want it to be. And that snap to grid is actually messing me up a little bit. So let's turn that back off. And I'm just going to use my alignment here to set that to the top and left of my thing here. So all right, so we can see that that is falling in line perfectly, so that's good news. I do have my measurements set up correctly, so I'll click once on this. I'll hit Command R to make sure my rulers are showing up here, and I can just drag out from the left side here a new guide, or I can click and drag from the top and then hold down Alt to flip it, and it's going to snap to that shape there. I'll drag a copy, and this time what I'll do, actually I don't even need a copy, what I'll do is I'll just throw this all the way to the right side, drag down another guide here, and that should snap into place. So there are my guides, but that doesn't help the printer at all. So what we're going to do is actually, well, probably the quickest way is just get my direct selection tool. I'll highlight this corner here, and I'll shift click this corner here and delete those, and now all of a sudden I just have two lines here. I'll hit Shift X or click on this to flip that from a fill to a stroke, and now we can see if I turn off my guides that we have that bright pink bar right there. Okay, so now I can drag a copy of this over to where my other fold needs to be. I'll shift click both of these and I'll make it full screen here. And then let's change this to a dotted stroke. So click on the stroke here. I'll turn that on my dashed line here. And then in big bright pink letters I'm going to type fold. And that way, hopefully, the printer realizes this is not a design element, and they'll remember to turn that layer off. But that way you'll catch it. You can see where that fold's going to be. So we've done that once, and let's click on these shapes here. Command C to copy. Actually, I'm going to Command X. I'm going to cut it. We'll come back into my layers and make sure we're on that folds layer. Command F to paste. And then I'll click once on this to target this artboard, but when I did that it changed to my other layer, so I'll come back up here and target that folds layer and hit Command F to paste it in front, so we can see where my folds are supposed to fall. Alright, so now let's go ahead and save this document. Command S to save, and we'll call this Final Brochure, and I'll stick this one in my Illustrator folder here, hit save. And that all looks good. I'll hit OK. Now what we need to do is export this. So what I'm going to do is go to File, Save As. We don't want to hit Export because I want to save a PDF, and a PDF option isn't in Export. So we'll go to Save As, and we'll go find that Finals folder. Alright, it's a really long name, but that way we know what it is. Okay, I'll click on the drop down on the format bar here, and we want to select a PDF. I'll hit save. And now what we're going to do, we'll leave Preserve Illustrator Editing Capabilities turned on. That's fine. We can even click View PDF after saving, so it opens it up for us automatically. Our compression should be fine. It's actually not compressing at all, so that's great. Marks and bleeds, this is where we want to turn on all of our printer marks, but we don't have the slug area like we did before, which is why we dropped that stuff on a separate layer on top. And then we'll use the document bleed settings we set up. So let's go ahead and hit Save PDF. And there we can see we've got our fold marks right on top of the document. The printers will definitely see that. We've got our trim marks. It looks a little bit different than what it came out of InDesign, but this is going to work perfect. And then once they're ready to print this, what they can do is come in through Acrobat Pro, click on this layers icon, and they can actually turn on and off those folds or those crop marks even if they wanted to, and print exactly how they need to. So that's how I would export it if I was trying to show folds from Illustrator.